Good evening, everybody. I presume you can all hear me. I just would like to welcome you all. Thank you all for registering and welcome to the first of 8 talks by 8 international speakers. You'll notice that your cameras and your microphones have all been turned off. It will be for the duration of the talk. My name is Catherine. I'm a member of the Cambridge Bahá'í community, and in collaboration with the Cambridge University Bahá'í Society, these 8 talks have been organized to commemorate the centenary of the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá, the date of which will be the 27th of November. For some, this is the first time you are learning about Abdu'l-Bahá, and maybe it was just the topic of the talk itself that intrigued you. For others, you know who Abdu'l-Bahá is, but you wish to gain a greater understanding. But I'm still going to just give us a very short introduction to Abdu'l-Bahá. After the passing of his father, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, Abdu'l-Bahá devoted his ministry to furthering his father's faith and to promoting the ideals of peace and unity. As well as being imprisoned for over 40 years, he was also knighted by the British for his humanitarian work during the First World War. But this is simplifying his significance, not only to the new religion, the Baha'i faith, but also his significance to us today and the world today. Hence, these 8 talks. Each speaker, as an academic, has researched their interest in the work, teachings, and life of Abdu'l-Bahá, and the talks cover diverse subjects, as you may have seen from the list already. I'm personally grateful for this time, the time that each speaker is giving to share their work and insights. The talks will each last 45 minutes. There will be some time at the end to answer questions. Please write them in the chat if you have any questions, and all talks will be recorded and will later be shared on the Baha'i Society YouTube channel. So feel free to watch them again or share the video to others. Any questions after the talk which you think or do not get answered during the hour, you can email these to Baha'i Society, and the email address will appear in the final slide. After the talk, you will receive a follow-up email with a list of all the talks. You are welcome and encouraged to share this list, and please register yourself for the other talks. I truly hope you will be inspired to join us for these other talks, because they are really a unique opportunity. Also, the email address will appear in that final, the email after the talk. I now would like to welcome our first speaker, Professor Hoda Mahmoudi. Professor Mahmoudi is speaking to us from Maryland, the US. She studies systematic racism and root causes of prejudice, equality of women as a prerequisite to peace. She has published several books on these topics, and her talk tonight is entitled A Culture of Peace, Abdu'l-Bahá's Integrative Vision. So now I hand over to Professor Mahmoudi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lee, and to the viewers, it's really my pleasure to join you your evening. I'm in Washington, D.C., so it's mid-afternoon for me, but I especially would like to thank not only the Baha'is of Cambridge, but the Cambridge University Bahá'í Society. As was mentioned in the introduction, this is a very special year for the Baha'is, the 2021, marking the commemorating the centenary of Abdu'l-Bahā's passing. I just want to say a little bit at the beginning about why I'm so interested in Abdu'l-Bahā's perspective on global peace. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, actually a friend of mine and I wrote a book called A World Without War, in which much of what I'm going to say today in terms of Abdu'l-Bahā's written works about peace from a Baha'i perspective are covered in that book. But I also go into some other information. So I just wanted you to know that if you would like more detail about what I'm going to speak of today, this book, A World Without War, will provide you with additional information. So, you know, Abdu'l-Bahá spent over 40 years of his life literally in prison. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. You could say it was an imprisonment. He was under surveillance. He was under house arrest. But for much of his life, he was not entirely a free person. And that also makes his life even more interesting. Now, I'm going to share my screen with you a few times in and out of the screen during my talk. And I want to do so because I want to show images of, this is Abdu'l-Bahá. And, you know, he never claimed to be a prophet, but he was designated the head of the Baha'i faith after the passing of his father in 1892. And so he has a very special place in the Baha'i faith in terms of him being considered as the authoritative interpreter of his father's writings. So this is extremely important because it keeps the religion unified. So after he was released from prison, and when he was released from prison, he was, you know, he was in his late 60s, and he had a very difficult life. So his health wasn't entirely perfect, but he decided to launch this amazing journey in which between 1911 and 1912, he took off from what was then Palestine under the Ottoman rule and the British mandate. He took off from, which I would refer to as the Holy Land, present-day Israel, and went to Egypt, and then eventually Europe, and then to the United States. And I thought it might be of interest to you that he actually, these are just slides of Abdu'l-Bahá. This one is in Brooklyn, New York, with the people that came out to meet him. These are not all Baha'is, all kinds of people on these journeys came out to hear and listen to Abdu'l-Bahā's talks. This is in Chicago, and this is also in Chicago. This is in New York City. You might see Abdu'l-Bahá at the far right of the picture. There's the flag of the US and the old flag of Iran, because that was the country of Abdu'l-Bahā's birth, even though he had been exiled from that country at the age of 8. Anyway, I know there are other images, but for the sake of time, I thought this was an interesting image, which was taken in England, and it includes British, Indian, Turkish, and Egyptian friends who came out to meet with Abdu'l-Bahá. So you kind of get a sense of this incredible journey that he set out on. And I think you might also be interested that he came to the United Kingdom twice, once on his way to the US and then on his way back. But I want to just cite to you that in the weekly budget during his second visit to the UK, this is a newspaper, it says Abdu'l-Bahá is due to arrive in England on the Celtic, this ocean carrier. By a strange coincidence, the newspaper article writes, he reaches London on the very day set for the peace negotiations. Now, mind you, this is 1911 and 12. This is World War I has not happened. And so Abdu'l-Bahá arrives in London as peace negotiations are going on. Obviously, there is something in the air politically. And anyhow, I just wanted to tell you that he did a lot in London and surrounding areas in the UK, and I think he went to Edinburgh. Again, there's not time to go into all of these amazing travels that he made in that region. And no offense to Cambridge, but he spoke at Oxford University on the eve of, actually it was New Year's Eve in 1912. He was invited to speak there at Oxford's Manchester College. Anyway, I just wanted to share a little bit about the man that I will be speaking about for the rest of this talk. So in this talk, I explore Abdu'l-Bahá's promotion of the Baha'i faith's vision of peace. This vision and the accompanying prescriptions for peace that follow are the Baha'i faith's most important undertakings. They are the tools by which humanity is directed to grow and are considered to be a recipe for social, intellectual, and spiritual development. And they are considered to be universal, global in their application, and not to any particular region of the world, but global. Importantly, the practices of peace are also deeds, not just ideals, but blueprints intended to be followed and implemented. During his time on earth, it may be said that Abdu'l-Bahá took the principles of peace laid out by his father and shaped them into practicable outline for how to envision and enact a more peaceful world. The theme of peace permeates every aspect of the Baha'i faith. Its doctrines, ideals, practices, and institutional structures. The faith speaks of the necessity of peace, both in the world and in the individual, which together form the predicate grammar for the initiation, maintenance, and preservation of peace. For Baha'is, peace is viewed as the outcome of a broader spiritual and material understanding that unifies not only peoples, nations, and religions, but also bridges the gulf between the spiritual and the secular. The Baha'i faith considers every human being, whether belonging to a religion or not, whether an atheist or not, as an essential participant and agent in the processes of peace. The goal of the Baha'i faith and the thrust of the Baha'i writings are to equip individuals for the work of creating peace. The Baha'i writings forbid conflict, whether in word or action, and they disallow violence. Yet the absence of conflict or war is not a sufficient definition of peace. For although the Baha'i writings address the prevention of war and the preservation of peace at a grand level, a comprehensive concept of peace must also address peace as a root cause and elemental pursuit in the day-to-day life of individuals. For Baha'is, this root of peace is situated at the base of all human life and articulates that we are all citizens and co-stewards of one planet. A growing awareness of our common heritage and interdependence allows us to strive for unity in our diversity. Thus, Baha'i writings speak to an overarching ethics of peace, intended to inscribe a living experience of peace in the real world. Regardless of culture, language, religion, ethnicity, race, gender, sex, nation, or tribe, all human beings are members of an organic unit. We are all one moral, spiritual, and ethical community. And as such, we all share responsibilities and have obligations in ensuring each other's well-being. And although Abdu'l-Bahá was deeply religious and a deeply spiritual man, he was not overly sanguine about religion's role, nor did he believe religion had always played an helpful role. He had personally witnessed the great evils done in the name of religion and understood the ways in which religion had often been a source of conflict throughout the ages. As such, Abdu'l-Bahá went to great lengths to redefine religion's proper purpose and role. He differentiated the teachings of the various religious prophet founders from the misrepresentations and falsifications introduced through man-made doctrines, and argued that religion, and here I'm quoting him, religion must be the mainspring and source of love in the world. Therefore, and this is really important, if religion should prove to be the cause of enmity and hatred instead of love, its absence is preferable to its existence. This remarkable statement, a deeply religious man calling for the absence of religion if need be, captures how for Abdu'l-Bahá, the Baha'i faith, the calling of peace was not to be slowed down for any reason. In fact, he went on to warn, and I quote him here, all the wars which have taken place since the inception of human history have emanated either from religious prejudice, racial prejudice, patriotic prejudice, or political greed and interest. As long as these prejudices last, so long will the foundation of humanity tremble. When such prejudices pass away, the world will at last find peace. End quote. For Abdu'l-Bahá, the type of prejudice experienced was secondary. All prejudice was to be rejected because it hampered the able processes of both individual and collective peace. Yet perhaps the most salient witness and legacy of Abdu'l-Bahá's vision of peace lies in his merging of theory and action, ideal and practice. As he envisioned it, and as he laid out and commanded Baha'is to follow, peace would never be achieved by words, proclamations, or theories. Peace involved ongoing activity, sweat, work, sacrifice, and endurance. He explained, and I quote, "Our desire for peace is not derived merely from the intellect. It is a matter of religious belief and one of the eternal foundations of the faith of God. That is why we strive with all our might and forsaking our own advantage, rest and comfort, forego the pursuit of our own affairs, devote ourselves to the mighty cause of peace, and consider it to be the very foundation of divine religions." End quote. Nowhere in this sacrificial vision of peace is it more obvious than in Abdu'l-Bahá's engagement with and mission to a critical political body during World War I. And here I want to share again the screen for a little bit and show you what I'm referring to. So at the end of World War I, Abdu'l-Bahá penned a series of letters to an organization called the Executive Committee of the Central Organization for a Durable Peace. From here on out, I'll refer to it as the CODP, the Central Organization for a Durable Peace, located at The Hague in the Netherlands. And here is a photograph of that group. It was founded in 1915 and was engaged in a shared effort with 40 other nations who sought to create, and I quote, "the new world order which must come after the present war." So they had seen the devastation, the absolute catastrophe of World War I. And now these countries had gathered together under this organization, and their aim was the new world order, which must come after the present war, how to create this new world order. Many of the national delegates of the organization would later be involved in the formation of the League of Nations. Now, I'm going to unshare for a bit because I want to say a little bit about this organization. So the contents of the letters that Abdu'l-Bahá sent to the CODP actually offer us a how-to guide to the lofty ideals of peace, yet Abdu'l-Bahá's extraordinary efforts to deliver these letters during a time of explosive war, worldwide pandemic, closed borders, and shifting national alliances reveal a perfect case study of faith and practice of the Baha'i faith. And this is really what Abdu'l-Bahá continually emphasizes, that it's not enough to have faith, it's not enough to have great ideals. How will we put them into practice? So in his letters, Abdu'l-Bahá begins by describing his father's vision for global peace, explaining that any holistic approach to global peace compels humanity to create new institutions with the capacity to function at a global, interdependent level. He argues that by the late 19th and 20th centuries, the world had already become interdependent, an interwoven place, necessitating an interwoven approach to peace and security. Developing the theme of what he refers to as patriotic prejudice. Now, remember, this is right after World War I, and he's addressing this lofty organization who wants a new world order. He refers to as patriotic prejudice, or what we would call nationalism. Abdu'l-Bahá pointed out that continued competition and contestation between the nations was unleashing intense hatred, greed, and bloodshed. Abdu'l-Bahá then asks his readers to consider the futility of man-made systems that fuel patriotic prejudice. In his vision, such systems can lead to the destruction of human civilization if left unchecked. Abdu'l-Bahá wrote in his letter to this organization that peace, and I quote, must first be established among individuals until it leads in the end to peace among nations, end quote. In other words, everyone, whether religious or not, must engage in an active work of love and care beyond one's own particularistic identity and ideology. Abdu'l-Bahá quickly draws attention to the evil of war, stating that, and I quote, there is no more important matter in the world than that of universal peace. But he warned, the longing for peace is not sufficient as a cause for producing peace. And he followed by saying, until the minds of men and women become united, no more important matter can be accomplished. Abdu'l-Bahá then introduces perhaps his most important concept, the necessity of a unity of conscience among the peoples of the world. So Abdu'l-Bahá then explains how unity of conscience is critical to world success and world peace. He explains that there's not one soul whose conscience does not testify that in this day there is no more important matter in the world than that of universal peace. So he acknowledges that every individual will say there's nothing more important than universal peace. But for Abdu'l-Bahá, the notion of conscience was not only a religious ideal, but a key differentiator between material and spiritual or moral approaches to human challenges. His vision of unity of conscience stressed the need for peace to be built upon a broader, deeper structure than was normally considered. A structure of human agreement and spiritual or moral consensus. Such a vast structure demands a kind of unity of thought. This unity of thought, in turn, can lead to the transformation of fractious aspects of culture and social institutions. And Abdu'l-Bahá tells us, for until the minds of men become united, no important matter can be accomplished. At present, he went on to say, universal peace is a matter of great importance, but unity of conscience is essential so that the foundation of this matter may become secure, its establishment firm, and its edifice strong, end quote. Now here, it is important to note that the Baha'i approach to peacemaking is far more than simply the elimination of war or the prohibition of weapons of mass destruction or methods of destruction. Rather, peace in this context emerges from an inner state, one that is supported by values and a spiritual framework to shape its architecture. In order to explore how to implement peace, we must first establish agreement on the moral and practical principles and measures that, when put into action, will remove the obstacles and barriers to peace. This significant first step of arriving at a unity of thought is a prelude to our then concentrating on implementing the solutions to the problems and challenges confronting humanity. Without establishing unity of thought and then unity of action on those thoughts, it is impossible to get at the root of the problems we face. Having fully established the importance of unity of conscience, Abdu'l-Bahá then provides a detailed discussion of various foundational teachings or principles of the Baha'i faith. Each of these teachings pertains to the principle of the oneness of humankind and articulates several preconditions of peace. Abdu'l-Bahá explains that today the world has become so small that all of humanity should be viewed as one, and the nations of the world should be considered as a united family or community of nations. Abdu'l-Bahá's principles, which he outlined in his letter to the CODP, include the necessity of human oneness, the unity of religion, the harmony between science and religion. That is, religion and reason must go hand in hand. The equality between women and men, which is a vital prerequisite to peace. And the destruction of both individual and institutional forms of prejudice and racism. These are all outlined in his letter. Additional principles that he mentions are a universal auxiliary language, by which means everyone in the world can communicate, and which will remove misunderstandings in communication between the peoples and even the rulers and leaders of the world. The promotion of universal language, the promotion of a universal education. In other words, everyone should receive an education. The voluntary sharing of one's wealth and property, voluntary sharing, in order to remove the extremes of inequality. And the role of religion in ensuring the emergence of a moral order. Most broadly, though, Abdu'l-Bahá identifies the need for present-day material civilization to be combined with spiritual and moral values in order to enhance its benefits to humanity as a whole. In fact, Abdu'l-Bahá, and I want to quote him, he says, these manifold principles, after he wrote all these principles to that organization in his letter, he says, these manifold principles, which constitute the greatest basis for the felicity of mankind and are of the bounties of the merciful, must be added to the matter of universal peace and combined with it, so that results may accrue. Otherwise, the realization of universal peace by itself in a world of mankind is difficult. If the question is restricted only to universal peace, the remarkable results which are expected and desired will not be attained. So he talks about the work that we must do by ensuring that principles are being enacted through human actions, and by promoting those principles, implementing them, that gradually over time, and I must say it will be a long time, we will have an idea of what universal peace means. Abdu'l-Bahá underscores to the CODP the significance of fact-finding work, or the process by which facts must be separated from assumptions, fiction, lies, or speculations. Extremely important, this principle that he brings up. Here, he introduces an important Baha'i principle whose aim is to remove conjecture or assumptions, and instead to strive to independently investigate reality. And that investigation has to be based on fact and not fiction. The independent investigation of truth, he explained, was an imperative step needed to ensure that the world of humanity may be saved from the darkness of imitation and attain to the truth. The principle is a reminder of the recent and ongoing debates that we are all a part of these days about truth, post-truth, and the erosion of trust throughout the social order. This principle of truth-seeking would show up again and again in Abdu'l-Bahá's written works and in his talks, and demonstrates how, for Abdu'l-Bahá, the principle of the investigation of truth was the means by which obsolete and outdated views and ideologies, as well as lies and distortions of facts, were to be eliminated. He explained that the investigation of truth removed, and I quote here, blind imitation of the past, which stunt the mind. Once every soul inquireth into truth, society will be freed from the darkness of continually repeating the past. In other words, repeating the mistakes of the past. In making this distinction, Abdu'l-Bahá was developing a theme other scholars have also pursued, and I'd like to just share one example of this. In an essay about that amazing philosopher, Simone Weil, the historian John Lukács wrote, and I quote him, "There is something in this world that is more important than the pursuit of justice. It is the pursuit of truth." That's the end of Lukács's quote. And then I want to just say that the quest for truth, as Lukács noted, and as Weil also explained, demands freedom from the customary ideas of our times. It insists upon freedom from imitation and blind adherence to tradition or customs. Fully knowing the truth for all of us necessitates abandoning our own viewpoint and those of others in order to let reality appear on its own terms. Lukács further expands this concept by saying, and I quote, "We in this world when the air of our cities is polluted by vicious film of empty words, are menaced less by the prevalence of injustice than by the prevalence of untruths. I think this really, in a way, gives us a sense of the importance of this principle of the independent investigation of truth as a means of trying to understand reality better and to give up the old manners and ways that we continue to engage in our ways of doing things. Abdu'l-Bahá also suggests that the process by which untruths are overtaken by truths demands unbiased and nonpartisan thinking and being. The pursuit of truth is always noble in and of itself, even when that pursuit reveals hidden failures and fissures in the larger society. In America, President Lincoln's call to look back to noble principles which the country was upholding was also a call to live up to noble principles, a call that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would repeat 100 years later during the Civil Rights Movement. These men demonstrated that the depositing of such ideals, such as freedom, equality, justice, unity, etc., that depositing of such ideals in a culture ensures that there remains the potential for development, ascendance, inward spiritual growth, and deepened humanity. Abdu'l-Bahá would also seem to be reminding the CODP and us of the noble ideals inherent in their own culture and nudging them gently to live up to the high calling of those ideals. The salient characteristics of the Baha'i faith, Abdu'l-Bahá informs us in his letters, is its capacity to unite members of all races, nations, and religions, and thereby remove potential barriers to peace. By removing the barriers to peace, humankind will gradually move toward the achievement of a universal peace. This universal peace, though composed of myriad components, should benefit all people. And yet, we might not have any record of these remarkable pleas and strategic guidance towards the operations of peace had not Abdu'l-Bahá directed an almost cinematic journey to the understanding in which two Baha'is marched more than 3,000 miles together to deliver these letters of peace to that CODP during the most violent and devastating conflict the world had ever known. And I will now share some slides with you once again to tell you this remarkable story of how these tablets and letters of Abdu'l-Bahá ended up in reaching the committee at The Hague in the Netherlands. In 1915, as World War I raged across Europe, two men in Iran, one on the left, aged 24, and the other an elderly man. The man on the left is Ahmad Yazdani, and the man on the right is Ibn Asdaq, 24-year-old and an elderly man. They had read an article in an Iranian newspaper about the work of the CODP at The Hague. The article announced the creation of an organization at The Hague and described its goals and programs for peace. These two men were so excited about the similarities between Baha'i view of world peace and the CODP's activities. And because they were so excited, they decided to seek the guidance of Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land, in Israel, who then directed them to travel from Iran to the Holy Land, where Abdu'l-Bahá had prepared the first of the two letters, which were then delivered by these men to the CODP. Abdu'l-Bahá himself understood that the object lesson of peace in this case, and that the shock that the committee in the Netherlands would have felt in seeing these uninvited, curious men in their city, only underscored and made real the ideals and commitments he was espousing. In other words, he would go to great lengths, any length, in order to promote the cause of peace. All told, it would take the men 40 days to reach The Hague. And you can see in this map their journey. And it was a difficult journey, but once they arrived at The Hague, it was also difficult for them to locate the committee's office. The arrival of two Oriental men in the Netherlands, and I want to go back to this image, created quite a stir, as you might imagine. The arrival, their arrival, these men who were very unusual looking as a pair. One was a bearded elderly man in a long Eastern attire. The other was a young, clean-shaven man wearing a business suit and a European-style hat. As they walked around the cobblestone streets of The Hague, people stared, pointed, and wondered where they had come from and why they were there. Actually, this is a story that Ahmad Yazdani himself, the younger man, writes in one of his memoirs about this journey, that people really were amazed at seeing these two men walk in the streets of The Hague. Eventually, the men discovered the location of the office of the CODP, and they realized that the original organization, the one with the 40 nations, had disbanded, and that what remained was the executive committee that was made up of the president and the secretary of the organization. But the men delivered Abdu'l-Bahá's letters to the organization's secretary, and upon doing so, they were astonished that two individuals had traveled 3,000 miles to discuss the nature of peace and its implications in Europe and abroad. This is what principle and practice looks like. And I think this is an amazing case study of that. So as I want to finish my talk, I'd like to just bring our attention back to the fact that it wasn't enough to write about peace. One had to go and get peace. Abdu'l-Bahá sought thus to enshrine deliberation and activity as the most salient aspects of faith, religion, and civic activity. He reminds his readers of the great faith traditions they would have known, in which men and women were commanded to believe, but also to act, and act by upholding moral and spiritual principles first, and then advancing toward finding the right principles to solve the problems faced by humanity. He also set an example for individuals who might seek to engage the world by showing them that it's not enough to be right. One must look sacrificially to serve others and to strengthen the bonds of friendship and become a constructive force of good. Abdu'l-Bahá urged humanity to advance what are essentially spiritual and moral undertakings. These include actions that promote trust, show kindness, love, empathy, and justice. These undertakings view peace as more than the simple elimination of conflict or war, but rather as the building of systems which can effectively assemble a better world. The process begins at the individual level and then permeates institutions and leads in the end to the nations, which together form a moral order. Abdu'l-Bahá was willing to go wherever peace demanded, wherever it demanded him to go, and to infuse the world with beauty, hope, and the testimony of the human spirit. Thank you very much. That concludes my talk.
Thank you so much, Professor Mahmoodi. That was really quite insightful. And I have to say, I was thinking, I've never heard the word peace and so much positive language in 1 hour for a long time. And it was very refreshing to hear. It was a wonderful also introduction to Abdu'l-Bahá as well. So I'm going to open it. At the moment, the chat is empty. I don't know if there are any questions, or everybody is just sort of internalizing and absorbing.
Sure. Maybe it was a boring talk, so
I don't think.
But I think I would encourage the listeners today to actually read about, there are many books about Abdu'l-Bahá. I encourage you to read about him and his travels, books about his travels in not only Europe, in the UK, in North America, but just also about him as an individual. You know, as many of us who are at universities, as we learn about so many different individuals in our classes, you know, who this one gave us this theory, that one gave us that idea. I think Abdu'l-Bahá should be one among those individuals, because truly his ideas, which are vast, I mean, he has written so many things on so many different subjects. It would be really encouraging if people would consider reading additional stuff about him.
I think you can see a couple of the questions there.
Yes. Okay, let's see. Are we closer to world peace now or further away than during that time? Thank you, Paul, for that question. I wish I had some insight into the future. You know, to explain it perhaps as Abdu'l-Bahá would, he never denied the fact that the world was full of problems. He never said that everything would be perfect just by trying to be better. What he tried to do was to say that we are on a process. We are, you know, moving in this great process of trying to raise consciousness about what it takes to bring about a culture of peace. And he would say it takes, as I said, sweat and effort and sacrifice and service. But I think he would say there will be obstacles in the way. There will be difficulties in the way. There may be even greater crises than World War I and World War II. I'm just, you know, speculating here. But that we always must stick to that process, because this ties into another issue or principle that the Baha'i faith talks about, which is that social change towards the more positive, or peace, if you will, happens with two forces at play, the disintegrative force and the integrative force. One is positive, one is destructive. But you know, after World War II, you know, after World War I, we tried the League of Nations. And although it had wonderful ideas, it didn't work. It fell apart. But after World War II, we got the United Nations. And that has done some amazing good work, but it now needs some re-examination. And so I would say to Paul that we have to stay the course. At this time, I would say the world is in a way drifting apart. Nations are drifting apart. But at the same time, who knows what will happen where? And I don't necessarily mean doom and gloom. Who knows what leader might arise or what group of leaders might come together to actually come up with a new model that fits better the particular time that we are in right now. So I would say that we are still moving towards peace, always, but it's a long process, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it may take centuries before we get there.
I think we've got 4 very good questions. Will probably take us.
Catherine, would you read them to me?
Sorry, so the next question is, thanks, Hoda, great stuff. Could such principles be adopted by the Taliban?
Well, I would hope so. They can be adopted by anyone, but I don't want to necessarily focus on just the Taliban. I would say that there are forces in the world that may have a different conception about peace, or whether they believe in peace or not is also something that I'm not sure about. But if the Taliban or anyone were to begin to implement such principles, I think they would see great results. And I think I think we already have such great results by watching a United Nations come into being, or watching this whole movement about our climate crisis. Look at how it started, let's say 20, 25 years ago, this whole problem with climate crisis. Lots of people didn't believe in it. Even the people who should have believed in it thought, oh, it's not anything I need to be concerned about. But look at how the raising of consciousness over this past several decades, through education, through discourse, through coming together and looking at the principles and our moral obligations and all of that. Look at how there is some semblance of, if you will, a unity among a group of people who really want to see more done in terms of saving this planet from the plight that we've all exposed it to. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think anytime those principles are followed, it leads to good things.
Transform. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more questions, and we've got 6 minutes. So I will maybe 1 or 2 sentences for each one. How do we re-establish the importance of truth in a post-factual world?
Always questioning assumptions. Always questioning just words that are put out there without any explanation. In other words, what are the facts? Go back to the facts. Go back to, if you will, scientific results as well. I would say always question the issues.
Very good. Yeah. And that was from Grant, and then from Sama and Sahba. What is the name of your book, and where is it available?
It's A World Without War, and it's available on Amazon. If you just put in A World Without War or my last name, it should show up.
Thank you. How is, and this is from Zachary, how is peace defined? The Baha'i faith is promoting it, but what constitutes peace? But what constitutes peace seems difficult to comprehend when one has or has not attained it, outside the more obvious circumstances of war and the lack of war. So what in the Baha'i definition of peace?
I wish I had a quick response, but I'll try my best. The Baha'i definition of peace, there's really not one definition. As I told you, there are all these principles, and they have to, but to put it succinctly, it begins with the individual finding a moral framework. I can't emphasize the moral framework enough. Spiritual framework. How, as an individual, do I behave in the world such that I don't cause division, I don't show hatred, I don't show unkindness? You know, how do I behave? It starts with the individual and internalizing these moral principles. And then how to take those principles into the workplace, into family life, into friendships, into whatever a person is exposed to in life. And over time, as individuals and their consciousness builds around this moral framework, over time, it travels, peace travels from the individual to the institutions, to the nations, and to humanity as a whole. What Baha'is are aiming for, quite frankly, is the development of a moral order. Because we are fine when it comes to material order. We have all the materials we need, all the technology we need. What is lacking is the moral aspect, the ethical aspect. So for Baha'is, that's why it has to start there with the individual and then permeate to the world.
Lovely. And Patsy Keane, she seems to agree. Thank you, Patsy, for your for adding to that. I think you're saying the same thing as Hoda. So I think one last question. Thank you for your fascinating presentation. How did the committee respond to the letters of Abdu'l-Bahá? Thank you, Ramin.
I didn't have time to go into that, but the book goes into that in detail. You know, the committee basically wrote back and said, you know, our work is more political and not spiritual. I mean, it was really not a very positive response. They thanked Abdu'l-Bahá. They were very thankful. They said, how wonderful that you wrote to us and this and that. But they said, our work is political and what you've written to us is more spiritual. And I just found that very interesting. And so we analyzed that in the book, that here is this organization that started out with this amazing lofty ideal of wanting a new world order, but then not quite seeing that, you know, World War II was utterly bereft of any moral explanation, totally bereft. And so anyway, but that didn't stop the work of either the two men or the work of Abdu'l-Bahá. I have to interject, if I may, quickly. Yeah. I have to tell you that the young man, this Mr. Yazdani, who went on this long journey, it took him eventually a year to get back to Iran. I didn't have time, but you know, he left a wife and several children in Iran. And he didn't have a livelihood when he was gone. He was an engineer and he had to quit his job in order to go on this trip. The story about his wife and how she managed during this time in Iran to keep the family afloat is also another remarkable story of sacrifice and willingness to do all that one can to promote peace.
Lovely, thank you. We've hit 8 o'clock and we said it'll be until 8 o'clock. I don't know, we seem to have come naturally to the end of the questions as well. So on behalf of everybody, I would like to thank you again, dear Professor Mahmoudi, for the talk and sharing so much that I'm sure we've all taken something away from this. And it's such a positive message as well. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a series of 8 talks. And there are 7 that are coming for the next 7 Fridays. So you'll receive an email with the links and for all these talks. And again, there's an email address if you have any further questions. And I think that's all I can say. So again, thank you to everybody for attending. And again, Professor Mahmoudi, thank you again. So everybody have a lovely weekend with all those thoughts. Thank you. Lots of thank yous there, Hoda.
I see that. Thank
you.
Lots
of thank yous there. So that's very nice.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
Yeah, no, really wonderful. Very I just sat back and nobody could have fallen asleep during that. It was very interesting. So
I thank you very much for the invitation and
yeah.
hope to see you in person one day.
Yes, I hope so too. I hope so too.
Take care, and I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.